In the last lecture, we just learned a really cool way to make a dynamic function that will get us the very last row that's available on any sheet. Now we're going to make it even better. So this function called dLastRow, we're going to make it even more dynamic because we're going to give a few more options to us, the programmers. Here's a few other scenarios that might arise. So obviously you want to find the last row so that maybe you can loop from row 2 all the way to, that last row from 2 to 6 instead of going from 2 to 1,000 every time because you don't know what the last row is. Well, now we know what it is. It's going to be awesome. But here's the deal. Sometimes this is what you get left with. Maybe you don't have a nice clean table that starts on row 1 with the headers and, starts on column A. Maybe you don't have that. So here's we're going to throw a couple scenarios at ourselves. Let's say these people are just, they have these dumb headers up here or like a report title instead of using the actual header of the footer of the page. They actually just made their own header and footer, and then their data maybe starts way over here on row 3 in column 2 or B. Well, now we're going to compensate for that because we're going to have rules. We're going to have some parameters that tells our function exactly where it should be looking whenever it's trying to find the last column or whenever it's trying to the last available which column to look for the last row. So this is going to be pretty interesting. So let's hit Alt F11 and let's just tweak this a little bit. So what are we going to need to know? Essentially, the first thing we're going to need to know, if we need to know the last row, is which column we're looking at. It is assumed in the function that we did earlier that we're looking only in column 1 or column A, if you will. So let's make this a little bit more dynamic. In this case, we're going to have an optional parameter, which is going to be crowNum, okay? And that's going to tell the macro that if we have this crowNumber, we'd like to use that row as, or excuse me, this should say ccolumnNumber. I apologize. ccolumnNumber, right? So that way we can say this particular table, if we're trying to find the last available row, we're going to probably be looking in column B and not really in column A. So that's why you might want to set the optional column number. Now, so we're going to say if is missing. We're going to say if the ccolumnNumber is missing, then we'll just make it ccolnum equals 1. So by default, we're looking in column 1 or column A. But otherwise, if it's not missing, then we'll just use whatever column that they said, hey, in this case, use this different column. And so here's what we do. We're going to take the ccolumnNumber and simply replace this hard-coded number 1, or column A, and we're going to replace it with a variable. That way it's dynamic. If it's nothing is put in that place, it'll be, column 1, column A. But otherwise, it'll use whatever we tell it to. So now let's try this out. This is sheet 2. So in this one, this is where we tested our new function out. We can still use this, but let's go ahead and change the one for sheet 2, comma, and here's the optional. And you notice that if it's an optional parameter, that it has these nice little brackets around it. And the ones that are required do not have brackets around it. So that's something to keep in mind. This one is optional, the column number. Well, I do want to use that. I want to use column 2, or I want to use column B, if you will. But for the other sheet, I happen to know that one, it's all good. They use column A, and they use the very first row. So that one's pretty normal. All right, so let's try this now. Let's hit F8, and let's take a look at what it does. So ccolumnNumber is not missing. So we're going to get the rows.count. So we go to the very bottommost row. But we're going to look in column 2 on this particular sheet before we hit the control up thing and land right here. And that way it returns number 8 for the last row for that particular sheet. But then the other sheet, that one's missing a parameter. So we're just going to look in column 1 and get the last row of 2. And that was for the sheet called left, right. So that one was fine. All right. So that is how we can use the optional parameters, and it's just another way that we can utilize them how we see fit. And I hope that gives you some more ideas. I hope you're going and trying this out on a whole bunch of ideas. And if you have any questions, hit us up in the forum. We want to know how you're using your custom functions so that we can all share our ideas and grow together. We'll see you in the next lecture.